NASCAR could make changes to the playoff format in 2025 or 2026, and according to Joey Logano, NASCAR told the teams and drivers that they were threatening to suspend drivers at the 2025 Daytona 500 had there been any race manipulation at the championship race at Phoenix. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports story discusser today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show those really quickly. We've got one paint scheme to take a look at, and it's Ryan Blaney's 2025 way bash scheme that we'll see in 2025. I gotta say, this scheme's very similar to last year's scheme. I do like the colors, though. It does look really, really solid. I'm definitely looking forward to see it on the racetrack in 2025. It does look pretty good. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Greg Maffei. As it was announced on Wednesday morning that Greg Maffei will be stepping down as CEO of Liberty Media. He will continue working Liberty Media as an advisor, but there'll be a new person coming in and taking over as CEO of the group going forward. Greg Maffei was one of the big reasons, unfortunately, that Andretti Global did not get a chance and opportunity to join Formula One in recent years, which is something that he kind of unfortunately affected. But they've also been able to bring in some new tracks in the U.S., among other things as well. Greg is a very controversial figure, and a lot of people are not the biggest fan of Greg Maffei, especially if you're in the U.S., and especially if you're a fan of Andretti Global. To me, I wish him the best of luck. He'll still, of course, be with the group going forward. Unsure, though, at this moment, who'll be taking over Liberty Media going into the future. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Door Bumper Clear. As Mike Davis, who was a higher up at Dirty Mo Media, confirmed that Door Bumper Clear will return in 2025. There's some speculation earlier this week that there was talk about Door Bumper Clear coming to an end because, of course, it was announced, I believe, on Tuesday that Brett Griffin will not be returning to Door Bumper Clear in 2025. And Freddie Kraft wasn't even sure if it was going to be continuing next year. Now, we don't know at this point who'll be on the lineup for 2025. I'd have to think Freddie Kraft most likely will be back with the lineup because I do think Freddie provides a lot of really good analysis on the show. And I do think that TJ Majors also could be back on the show. My question is, will they get Carson Elledge as maybe she would be the one that's the host going forward? I think she did a really good job being the host of the show. Maybe they're going to get Joel Edmonds perhaps, which that could certainly be a possibility, but at this point, I don't know who they're going to decide and choose going forward. But to me, it's very interesting, and it looks like it will be back in 2025. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Bowman Gray. As it was confirmed yesterday that Bowman Gray will have new safety barriers installed at the racetrack, and they will have a new catch fence that is added and updated from the previous catch fence that they had. They also will have a new lighting system that will be coming in before the clash takes place. Remember, Bowman Gray is going to be hosting the Busch Light Clash on February the 2nd, so a little under 3 months from now, we will see the clash at at the Bowman Gray Stadium. And they've got to get safety barriers in there and get the track up to safety requirements. Now, I know some fans are going to say that's going to make the track a lot shorter, but especially when you have a very professional series, you got to basically take this track a lot more seriously, and you've got to get the track up to date. I know Bowman Gray has its charm with all the chaos and everything, but to me, you've got to get the track up to scruff and up to date. So I think this is a really good decision for them to go ahead and do this, and I'm glad to see that they're making a decision to go ahead and add safety barriers. I think every single track in the country, they've got the budget and the money, should be having safety barriers there. I think that's the way they should be doing it, so I do think safety barriers are super, super important. Glad to see it looks like that they're doing that and they're working toward that because I think it's what they need to be doing, trying to make tracks as safe as possible, in my opinion. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Meyer Shank Racing. As it was announced yesterday that Meyer Shank Racing has revealed all their lineups and additional drivers that will be running the Rolex 24 this upcoming season. So Felix Rosenquist and Scott Dixon are going to join Colin Braun in the number 60 car for Meyer Shank Racing at the Rolex 24. While Alex Plow is going to join people like Nick Yellowey and drive the number 93 car. Remember, Meyer Shank Racing will be expanding to a 2-car operation in 2025, returning to the basically IMSA for next year, and they're bringing some heavy hitters. And a big reason for this is because Meyer Shank Racing and Chip Ganassi Racing do have a partnership going into 2025. And I do think having this partnership absolutely makes a lot of sense sense going forward. I do believe that generally when you look at the three drivers they're bringing in, Alex Palou was super strong on IMSA races and was really quick in Le Mans 24 hours last year. And Scott Dixon is a winner of the Rolex 24 in multiple different occasions. Same with Felix Rosenqvist, as I think Felix has never competed in the Rolex 24, but I do think you've got really strong lineups. You got Tom Blomqvist coming into play, and I think that this lineup for 2025 at the Rolex is absolutely huge. So to me, I'm really excited about these lineups. I think these lineups are good, and I would not be surprised or shocked if Meyer Shank Racing does end up going to victory lane in the Rolex 24. I think they've got some really strong lineups going into this year's Rolex 24. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Rackler War Racing. As it was reported by Bob Pockers on Wednesday, that Rackler Racing will move its truck operations to the former GMS fabrication in Statesville, North Carolina. This means Rackler moved from Tennessee to North Carolina. Rackler Racing has been operating their shop in the Nashville area over the course of the last few years, as I believe Willie Allen and basically Curtis Sutton are from that area, if I'm not mistaken, which is why their shop has been there. But a lot of people tend to say that if you go out to North Carolina, a lot of times you can end up being successful, unless you're Furniture Row Racing, who of course had a ton of success not being in the NASCAR hub and area. I think that they will have a better chance of being competitive. I do think they'll have potentially a pretty big announcement with Nice Motorsports or something like that. They'll have a really big technical alliance with them. So they're looking to get a lot better going forward, and they want to improve. They've got a really young but pretty talented driver in Dawson Sutton coming in there full time next year, and maybe we could see a second truck at some point. Who knows? But I do think going into the hub and working in the NASCAR area does make a lot of sense because you're not having to travel back to Nashville all the time, and you could be in the NASCAR Central area where you can find a way to get a technical alliance to make your team a lot stronger and a lot better. To me, this makes a lot of sense for their organization. I think it's a really good step for them to go in the right direction because 2024 was not a good year for the team. They really struggled all season for the most part, considering a year prior, Matt DiBenedetto got the team in the playoffs. It's been a struggle for the team. Hope with them moving into the Statesville, North Carolina area, they can end up improving and doing a lot better in 2025. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Keelan Harvick. Now, over the course of the last couple of years, there's been some interesting questions surrounding Keelan Harvick's future and whether he's going to Formula One outlet or going in the NASCAR road going forward. And someone asked a question, as Kevin was asking a ton of questions on and answering a ton of questions, and I think he's doing some sort of Q&A during the offseason. And someone asked, is Keelan more focused on going to Formula One direction or is he more focused on the NASCAR direction? And NASCAR pretty much, not NASCAR, but Kevin Harvick pretty much confirmed that Keelan Harvick is going all full focus on NASCAR going forward. I love seeing this for Keelan. Obviously, Keelan is kind of been getting more into the stock car realm. He competed in some LMCSC races very recently. Competed, I think, in some late model events not too long ago. And was actually testing a late model stock car not too long ago. I believe about a month or so ago was testing one of those cars. To me, I think Keelan wants to be as successful as his dad. Kevin Harvick was one of the greatest NASCAR drivers of all time. 60 career NASCAR Cup Series wins, a Cup Series championship, 2 NASCAR Xfinity Series titles, and also won a ton of Craftsman Truck Series races as well. So seeing Keelan go down that door is really huge. Keelan, I believe, is 12 years old, if I'm not mistaken, around that age. So Keelan only would need to wait 4 more years to race in the Truck Series on a part-time basis. So there's a potential possibility that we could see Keelan in the Truck Series as early as 2028 or 2029. It could also compete either in the ARCA West Series or the ARCA East Series as early as 2027 because he'll be 15 and you can run in the ARCA West and East Series at the age of 15 years old. I think Keelan has got a ton of potential to be successful in this sport. There's a lot of hype around him, which is completely justified, and I think that there's a lot of potential for him to be very successful going forward. So I'm excited for his future. I'm excited to see that he's fully focused on NASCAR, and I think he's going to bring a lot to the table, especially if he can be super successful like his dad was. I do believe he's got a great chance and opportunity to be super successful and do great things going into this sport because I do believe he's got a lot of talent and a lot of potential. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Sheldon Creed. Now, Sheldon Creed was at the Rockingham test for the NASCAR Xfinity Series for the tire test. Of course, the NASCAR Xfinity Series and the Craftsman Truck Series are headed back to Rockingham for the first time in a long time. And Sheldon Creed was basically talking about his transition and first time working at the Haas factory team. Remember, Sheldon Creed is, of course, not going to be back with Joe Gibbs Racing in 2025, as, of course, he'll be joining the Haas factory team in the 2025 season. It kind of talked about the first work with the team. What's kind of interesting, I think someone brought this up, maybe NASCAR Man or Matt Weaver brought this up on Twitter. Basically, it's very similar to how when Ryan Newman joined the team, they actually had a test at Rocky, I believe, in October or September of 2008. And then, of course, they went to have a lot of success. So it's very interesting that the first time you see this team show up is kind of similar to how Stu Ross Racing, when the merger between Tony Stewart and Gene Haas came into play. That's kind of where they started everything. To me, I think Sheldon Creed has a ton of potential going into 2025 to be successful. He is still, of course, looking for his first career NASCAR Xfinity Series win. People still call him a bust, which is stupid considering he is a Truck Series champion. And the guy also has been competing for wins a lot, has like 13 or 14 runner finishes at this point, along with the fact he's going to have a solid teammate and Sam Mayer going with him there next year. I'm really excited to see what Sheldon Creed can do in 2025 because I do think he's got a lot of potential, and I do think he's going to be doing some pretty good stuff going into next year with this team. I think he will be a championship threat, and I really hope he can be very solid and very successful in 2025 with the Haas factory team. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Connor Zilisch and Shane Van Gisbergen. If you were on social media over the course of the last couple of days, you probably saw a really cool thing that Red Bull was doing. Connor Zilisch and Shane Van Gisbergen are both part of the Red Bull family. Connor joined about a year or so ago, or about 4 or 5 months ago, I believe at Watkins Glen. That weekend, of course, he went on to win his first ever NASCAR Xfinity Series race. But they actually taught Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson, who drive basically the Visa Cash App Racing Bull car, they taught him how to race on dirt ovals and try to test out their stock car skills. This is what we want to see from sponsors that work with drivers in the endorsement side of things. And I think it's really cool that you have Connor Zilisch, who is arguably the best prospect NASCAR seen in quite some time, and Shane Van Gisbergen, who's been one of the fastest learners on the stock car scene, who has some dirt racing experience as well, by the way. It's really cool that they're teaching drivers in the Formula One world, like a Yuki Tsunoda or Liam Lawson, two very young but really solid drivers in Formula One, a chance to see their stock car skills. And it's interesting they chose dirt ovals and not like pavement. This apparently was filmed, I think, around the Dakota weekend for Formula One, if I'm not mistaken, about a month ago. Of course, Formula One is back in the U.S. this weekend, next weekend with the Las Vegas GP, and I do think you'll see some NASCAR drivers go out and do some branding with them going forward. But I do think it's cool to see something like this, and seeing Red Bull get involved with both Connor and SVG is huge again, and I think it's exciting to see that we continue to see partnerships like this, which I think is very, very important going forward, right? We want to see partnerships succeed. We want to see partnerships grow, and I think it's pretty exciting nonetheless to see that you got Connor Zilisch and SVG doing some really cool work with the guys from AlphaTauri. Really exciting and really fantastic stuff overall, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Monaco Grand Prix. As it was announced yesterday morning that the Monaco Grand Prix has been extended its contract with Formula One through 2031. However, there are going to be changes for the Monaco Grand Prix starting in 2026. As basically the Triple Crown Day, where the Monaco GP in the morning, the Indy 500 in the lunch, and then the Coast 600 at night is no longer going to be a thing starting in 2026, as this race will move away from its traditional Memorial Day weekend, I believe now, to early June. The rumor is that potentially Barcelona may be moving up a little bit to a different schedule. Remember, Barcelona will be hosting a Formula One day for the first time. They will be going away, I believe, from the Circuit de Catalunya track in 2025 or 2026 in Madrid or Barcelona. And then, of course, you do have the fact that they want to move Montreal back to a different time in the schedule. This is really, really disappointing to hear, but this is not surprising considering Formula One has done a lot of stuff like this in the past where they change things around, they change around traditions, but I'm glad the Monaco Grand Prix is going to be sticking around. Is the Monaco GP one of the more exciting races on the Formula One calendar? No, absolutely not. But it's tradition. The Monaco Grand Prix has been around for many, many years. I am also disappointed to see that the Monaco GP will not be on its traditional date going forward when it's usually on Memorial Day. But what this is going to do is open up the doors potentially to drivers in Formula One maybe going and racing either in the Indy 500 or the Coke 600. Maybe getting Lando Norris to run the Indy 500. Maybe seeing if Max Verstappen, if he ever decided to change his career, maybe seeing him run the Indy 500. Maybe seeing Lewis Hamilton do it. I think it would be really awesome for Formula One drivers like how Fernando Alonso was pretty much successful in his first year until the engine let go very late in the event, and he had one of the fastest cars in the race. I do believe that getting drivers to go out and run in different series, to me, is very, very important. So I really like this, and I really hope we do see more of this going forward. We do see drivers go out and do different things. And I think that Monaco, if they're moving date around, that's the one positive of this. We might get to see the chance and opportunity for drivers to go out and try different things and maybe run the Indy 500 in the future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jamie McMurray. Now, ARCA Sarton Park car Colby Evans put out a very interesting tweet indicating that Jamie McMurray had tested an ARCA car at Rockingham this past weekend. We already talked about this, but the NASCAR Xfinity Series drivers of Sheldon Creed, Brandon Jones, and Justin Allgaier, who won the championship this year in Xfinity, they were all testing at Rockingham Speedway doing a tire test at the track. And interestingly, Jamie McMurray was among those who was testing an ARCA car. Now, there could be a couple things this indicates. Number one, Jamie McMurray is interested in maybe running the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, perhaps, because Jamie McMurray has had a lot of success at this track. I think he's won the last 4 straight NASCAR Xfinity Series races at the track since 2002, and he's been very successful at the track in recent years. And I think even though he hasn't been in a car in a couple of years, the last time I think he raced in NASCAR was 2020 or 2021, I still think it'd be pretty cool to see Jamie McMurray get back behind the wheel. But the only other thing I could think of is maybe he's doing this because of his broadcasting contract. We don't know if he's going to be back with Fox Sports yet in 2025. So my theory is that they're doing this also to get him prepared to start getting ready to work in the new CW booth in 2025. We're still waiting on details of what the broadcast booths are going to look like, and we're late in the year, so we've only got a few months of the start of the year, so we should pretty soon be getting more details on that. But it's been rumored that Jay McMurray might be leaving Fox to go to the CW, because I think Jay McMurray's been a really good analyst, especially for the Xfinity broadcast, but I think him being part of the broadcast booth is something that should be done. I think that's a big reason why you're seeing him test an ARCA car at Rockingham, is also get prepared for his contract in broadcasting. So we'll see what happens going forward and with that kind of stuff. But to me, this kind of indicates there's a good chance and possibility that we're going to see him be testing to kind of get prepared for his contract in the booth in 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Drew Blickensderfer. As it was posted by the NASCAR Rumor Nostalgia account that it sounds like that Noah Gragson's crew chief has been kind of revealed for 2025. And according to what they've heard, it sounds like Drew Blickensderfer will be basically be following Noah Gragson over to Front Row Motorsports in 2025. And it sounds like the number that Noah Gragson more than likely will end up using is the number 4. Now, getting to the number real quick, that has been the rumor that we've heard over the course of the last few weeks, is that they're looking to use the number 4. I think Movement had put it on his Twitter that he had heard at a fan event that basically they had heard that the number they were going to be using is the number 4 for 2025. And we've been wondering who the crew chief was going to be. Now, Drew Blickensderfer and Noah Gragson have gelled together very, very well in the past. And early in the year, despite how bad the end of the year kind of went for the team, the beginning of the year, Noah Gragson was very, very impressive. Was in the top 20 points early in the year and really impressed me. And showed he still had a lot of potential and was starting to get that confidence back that he had kind of lost in 2023 because Legacy Motor Club just really had a bad year. And I think you look at how bad they were this year, we kind of have to apologize for blaming Noah Gragson for the lack of performance when Legacy Motor Club generally was struggling in really, really big ways. But what's really also kind of be interesting about this is Drew Blickensderfer will be reuniting with his old team. Before he joined SHR, the crew chief, I believe, for Eric Almirola in 2022, he was a crew chief for Michael McDowell in 2021, and they won the Daytona 500 together. And I think working with Ford in a big way has been really huge for that program. So I do think that Drew Blickensderfer, if he truly does end up over back at Front Row Motorsports, I think that's a great pickup for that team, and keeping Noah Gragson and working together when they've gelled together super, super well is huge in my opinion. So I'm excited for this going forward. I think Drew Blickensderfer is a very, very good, is a solid crew chief. Not the best crew chief in the world, but the guy has, of course, won the Daytona 500s 3 times up, or 2 times, or 3 times up to this point, and has been super, super solid and super successful for many, many years. To me, I'm excited to see what he can do if he truly heads over to work with Noah Gragson, but judging judging by what is being reported, it sounds very likely at this point that it's likely going to happen, or we're going to see this happen for 2025. And to me, I'm excited to see what he can do with Noah Gragson in 2025. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Long Beach Grand Prix. As it was officially confirmed yesterday early morning that the Penske Entertainment Group has officially purchased the Long Beach Grand Prix. And they will begin hosting events for the 50th anniversary starting in 2025. There's been speculation over the last year or so that this was going to happen when the Kevin Calcoven estate kind of came up, basically kind of sold it off, looking to sell it. And Team Penske was one of the teams that was looking to purchase it, but also NASCAR was involved trying to find a way to purchase the Long Beach Grand Prix as well. But then Jerry Forsythe, literally a couple days after his report had come out early in the year, he basically denied these by basically saying that he wants it to be an all-around IndyCar event and an IMSA event and does not want NASCAR or Formula One coming over and taking the event away. Despite the fact that this originally was a Formula One event originally, but I digress. Anyways, Team Penske buying it up is really, really huge. Now, were some people talking about potentially NASCAR coming into play and working with the Long Beach Grand Prix, and some have thought maybe especially with Roger working really close with NASCAR for many, many years up to this point, maybe we could see him find a way to purchase it and have like a doubleheader with IndyCar and, of course, NASCAR, where NASCAR might race on Saturday, and then, of course, you have IndyCar being the headliner on Sunday. That could be a possibility right now, but I believe it was confirmed by Mark Miles and Roger themselves, speaking to the media basically when this got announced yesterday. There's no plans to talk to NASCAR at this moment, and they're basically only 3-day weekends allowed, so you would have to have everything happen on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I think that would be super, super difficult unless you could find a way to change the contracts up. That'd be the only way that you could make this end up working. So to me, I do think that's good to see that the Long Beach Grand Prix is sticking around with the IndyCar side. I think that if they lost that would have been a major, major loss for Penske and one of the worst things that's happened for that group in recent years. So I'm glad to see they got that resolved. I'm glad to see they got that figured out. And it's good to see the Long Beach Grand Prix will be sticking around with the Team Penske and the Penske Entertainment Group going forward. It's great to see this nonetheless, and glad to see that they officially will be keeping it around because I think it's a big win for them to keep it around going forward. I'm, again, very happy to see the Long Beach Grand Prix is officially back with the Penske Group in the future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about start times. As NASCAR officially revealed the start times for the Cup Series, the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and the Truck Series for 2025. And there's some very interesting headlines and very interesting notes in regards to this. Beginning with the Clash. As expected, the Busch Light Clash once again will be a night race on Fox on February the 2nd. The race will take place at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. That means that this race is going to be run when it's super, super cold potentially. While it can be a little bit warmer at times in February, it's sometimes been the 50s. I do think it's potentially going to be a very cold night. So if you're going out to the Busch Light Clash at Bowman Gray, be prepared to bring a coat because it's probably going to be super cold at the track. I think tickets are not selling as well because of that, unfortunately. But I do think that it being a night race will make it interesting. But I do think also we might see some tire issues coming into play as well. The Daytona 500, Atlanta, and Circuit of America will also be on Fox. So there are 3 of the other 4 races that will be on Fox. So 3 straight races on Fox, 1 road course race, and 2 super speedway race. That makes a lot of sense. And the Coke 600 is the only other race that is going to be at Fox. Nashville, for all 3 series, will be night races in 2025. Positive change. If you saw earlier this year, when you saw the races, it was super, super hot when the races ended up happening. Drivers were having to go to the infield care center. So having the races start at night, I think it's 7 Eastern for the Cup Series. Ton of sense in my opinion. Great decision. Chicago Street Course, they're moving the time up to earlier. The race will be at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time instead of 4:30 or 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Massive positive change. Something that absolutely needed to change because they had the race scheduled at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You run into the issue and rain comes into play that you cannot get the race done and on time. It's basically about time the Xfinity Series race will be taking place next year as well. So having around where the Xfinity Series time is starting to makes a lot of sense. That is a fantastic and really good change. Las Vegas, they've also had a change for next year as they will have the race at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Very late. I'd have to think that's because of maybe football perhaps or something like that. I'm not exactly sure why they moved that race later in the day. I think where they had it wasn't too bad. The weather, while it was warm, was not super warm at the track. So I do question this one a little bit. I guess maybe because they want to have it be going in the night, maybe like a day to night transition, which I think is very interesting. But I'm not the biggest fan of this change. And finally, there will be 3 truck races that will be taking place on Fox in 2025. Lime Rock, I believe Gateway or Michigan will be on there, and there was another race I saw that is going to be on Fox next year, but that's a positive for trucks going from 1 to 3 races. Also, the Xfinity Series race at Gateway will be a night race next year. It will be at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Luckily, Gateway has lights, so they'll at least have a night race for next year. To me, I think there's definitely some positive changes with the start times for next year, but there's also some negative changes that I don't agree with. I think that Vegas start time is definitely a little bit interesting, but I'm not the biggest fan of that. Personally, I think the start times are decent, but they're not the greatest I've seen, and I do wish the races would be starting a little bit earlier because I think that makes a lot of sense in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Shane Van Gisbergen. As it was confirmed yesterday that Shane Van Gisbergen will not race at Colleague at all in 2025. Remember, Shane Van Gisbergen, of course, is moving out to the NASCAR Cup Series full-time in 2025 to drive the number 88 car for Trackhouse Racing in the NASCAR Cup Series. Now, why is this newsworthy? Well, there has been some talk that maybe Colleague Racing could run a part-time entry, maybe a 4th part-time car for 2025, as, of course, they've got all 3 of their full-time drivers set for next year. Dale Dye is going to drive the 10, Josh Williams is going to drive the 11, and Christian Eckes will drive the number 16 car in 2025. The speculation was that maybe they were going to have a 4th part-time entry, maybe like the number 12 or 13 car perhaps, and maybe we're going to put someone like a Shane Van Gisbergen behind the wheel of a part-time entry. Well, that is not going to be happening, it sounds like, for 2025. So if SVG does want to go back down to Xfinity, where could he go? Well, I think there's a chance he could go to a team like Junior Motorsports. Connor Zilisch, who of course is also working with Trackhouse very, very closely, being a development driver for their team, I would have to think that could be where he ends up racing in 2025 if he does race in Xfinity, which I do think that would be a really good option for SVG, right? I think racing for a team like Junior Motorsports, who, no offense to call it, but Junior Motorsports is a better organization as a whole. They just won their first championship in 6 years. I do believe that if he drove for that program, I think he'd be very, very successful, especially on road courses. And I think putting him up, especially at COTA early in the year, going up against Connor Zilisch and AJ as well, that's going to be some tough competition. Even Kyle Larson shows up at that race, that'd be some tough, or even Chase Elliott, that'd be some really tough competition as well. To me, I'm really excited, though, not excited he won't be back at Colleague next year, but I think that he's making the right decision if he does come back to Xfinity, going to a team like Junior Motorsports, would make a lot of sense. I really hope that they make that decision there, because to me, it would be the right and probably the only decision that they could make, in my opinion, that would make a lot of sense going forward. So we'll see what happens, but of course, SVG sounds like we'll be not racing for Colleague at all in 2025. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. Now, if you were on social media over the course of the last couple of days, you probably saw that Larry McReynolds was calling out Denny Hamlin for his idea of a playoff format, which we're going to get to here in just a short little bit. But basically, Larry McReynolds was basically saying that someone could win the championship without winning a race in the system. Absolutely perfect. Well, Denny Hamlin responded to Larry McReynolds by basically saying, hey, Larry, I hate to remind you about this, but there was someone who basically won a championship in 2019 that didn't win a single race. Believe it. Also, he kind of called out Larry McReynolds for the lawsuit going on as well. Also, we saw NASCAR maybe calling out Denny Hamlin with the Monopoly cards. I think Denny Hamlin's saying, Larry, can you stop spreading misinformation about our lawsuit going on? That would be appreciative. Thanks. Denny Hamlin was not holding back when it came to this. And I think that Denny Hamlin does have a point, right? Because Larry McReynolds, I really didn't understand the tweet. A lot of things he was saying wasn't making a ton of sense with me, right? I don't think it was absolutely making a lot of sense because I think Denny Hamlin has a point. And Denny Hamlin's right too. Matt Crafton won the Truck Series Championship in 2019, despite the fact that, guess what? He didn't even win a single race. So I don't understand what Larry McReynolds was trying to prove here. And it seems like that Larry McReynolds may have a little bit of vendetta against Denny Hamlin, considering, like I said, that we've seen the 2311 stuff and Denny Hamlin calling out Larry McReynolds for the 2311 racing lawsuit going on at this moment. Which I understand why he's basically defending 2311 Denny Hamlin, right? Because he owns the organization. So, of course, he's going to defend the team no matter what. To me, though, I do think that Denny does bring up a lot of good points, especially with the system they have. And we'll talk about my system here in just a short little bit near the end of the episode. But to me, I think that Denny Hamlin calling out Larry McReynolds is definitely really, really funny overall. But I do understand why Larry's maybe calling out the same token at the same time. I don't understand Larry in a sense. And I do think that he probably kind of misplaced some of the anger. I don't understand where Larry was going with being frustrated at Denny. I really didn't fully understand that. It didn't make sense fully to me, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Parker Retzlaff. Now, we did a video covering this on the channel yesterday, but it was announced yesterday afternoon that Parker Retzlaff will not be returning to Jordan Anderson Racing in 2025 and continuing to drive the number 31 car next year. Parker Retzlaff has been with Jordan Anderson Racing over the course of the last 2 seasons and has had quite a bit of success with the team. He, of course, won 2 poles earlier this year at Richmond and, of course, at Martinsville, and could have had a couple of chances and opportunities to go to victory lane. Now, why could Parker not be returning to the team? A lot of theories are going around is that what happened at Daytona earlier this year. Parker Retzlaff was making his second career NASCAR Cup Series start, driving a number 62 car for Beard Motorsports, and was right behind Harrison Burton, while you have Kyle Busch, who had not won a race this year and looking for his first win at the time of 2024, which Kyle Busch would go on to fail to pick up a victory in 2024. Parker was right behind Harrison Burton, and he pushed Harrison Burton to victory lane. Chevrolet, from what Parker had said, Chevrolet and RCR were not very happy with Parker Retzlaff about the situation, and they apparently were not very happy, which is one of the reasons why, and like people like myself, have theorized that Parker Retzlaff will not be back with this team in 2025. If that is the true case why Parker Retzlaff is not back at Jordan Anderson Racing in 2025, that is a really big shame, and it's also something that we need to kind of talk about with Chevrolet having way too much power in this sport. I think that's really disappointing. Now, where could Parker Retzlaff go in 2025? There are some decent options out there. RSS Racing, a team he's formerly worked with in the past, that could certainly be a possibility. Rhett Jones Racing, apparently they're looking to run full-time this year, doing more races in 2025. So I'd have to think maybe he goes there, or maybe Chandler Smith goes there, and maybe he ends up going to a team like Auer would have been an option, but I don't think Auer's an option for next year, as I think Chris Wright's going there. And I do think there's some other drivers that and teams that are out there, maybe part-time with JRM. That could certainly be a possibility. But the question is, who takes over the seat? The only driver I can think of is Anthony Alfredo. Anthony Alfredo, of course, as I've heard, will not be back with Auer Motorsports in 2025. And theories are going around that potentially he'll be headed over to Jordan Anderson Racing, which I think Anthony is definitely a lateral move for the team. I think Parker and Anthony are very similar in performance, both talented, but I don't think Anthony Alfredo is going to absolutely outperform Parker Retzlaff, right? I just don't expect that. So I do think that that'll be who I think will be taking over for Parker Retzlaff in 2025. I'm not really shocked by this, like I said, considering the fact that there was some frustration building, but I do personally believe that I'm a little bit disappointed to see that if Chevrolet really got involved and made the decision here, I think that is really disappointing, but also the same token and same time, I'm not really shocked about this, considering the fact how much power Chevrolet has. Do I agree with it? No, but like I said, I'm not majorly shocked and majorly surprised to see that they're doing that and being frustrated because they kind of have a little bit of grit and they have a little bit of frustration with their drivers at times that are part of their program. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about RFK Racing. Now, yesterday on social media and Twitter, RFK Racing put out a tweet talking about their shop. And they basically said they're working on their shop and they're doing some construction at their shop currently at the moment. Now, why is RFK Racing updating their shop? Well, it's been heavily rumored and it's been heavily expected that RFK Racing is going to expand to a 3-car operation starting in 2025. It's rumored that Kroger will be over there to work with the team next year as Kroger will leave the JTG Doherty Racing organization. They'll be looking, of course, for a name change going into next year as, of course, Tad and Jody Geschecter are now working at Joe Gibbs Racing. But RFK Racing is expected to pick up the sponsorship from that in 2025. So who's going to be the driver for this team as they do expand? Well, it's heavily rumored that Ryan Preece will be coming over to work with the team in 2025. I think Ryan Preece is a very, very solid driver who hasn't really gotten a fair shake to me. And I think them expanding makes a lot of sense, especially if Kroger's coming in, the sponsor for a majority of races. I think that is a really good driver to work with. I think he's a very talented driver who has not been able to show all the full capabilities that he does have. I think he's got a lot of talent, and I think he's got a ton of potential. Again, we don't know who the crew chief is, and we don't know the number at this point, but speculation is that the number they're going to use for them is probably the number 60. That's what Brad Moran, who is one of the people that does a competition for the sport, that's who it sounds like could potentially be the number they end up using. To me, though, I do believe that RFK expanding is a good decision. They continue to grow, they continue to develop, and to me, I'm glad to see that RFK Racing is looking to expand next year. As they continue to work on their shop, they will be, like I said, likely expanding to a 3-car operation in the 2025 season. Really excited about this and looking forward to see them expand next year as they will continue growing their brand in 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kurt Busch. Now, yesterday, Kurt Busch gave an update on social media. Basically put out a reflection tweet and basically said the last 90 days have been kind of a reflection on myself, and I'm definitely ready to come back to the racetrack and have a lot of fun. Now, Kurt Busch, just for the record, confirmed that he is not getting back behind the wheel of a race car at this moment. That needs to be clarified so people don't think he's coming back to get behind the wheel of the race car at this point. Now, obviously, if you've been on social media, if you've been basically in the news world, you probably saw that Kurt Busch unfortunately got arrested a couple months ago. But Kurt was, of course, basically working with the employees, basically working with the officers and working with the authorities to try to basically resolve this situation and not have issues going forward. And Kurt Busch, of course, did basically turn himself in and pled guilty. And I believe has either been given a misdemeanor charge and didn't have to, I believe, serve time in jail. That the jail sentence, I believe, was suspended for Kurt Busch. So that is a really, really good thing. Kurt Busch, unfortunately, was out of DUI and was driving under the influence. Now, my biggest hope for Kurt Busch, right, is that he does continue to get the help he needs and does continue to improve himself. That is the most important thing. If someone can prove themselves that they can change, that's a good step in the right direction for me. That is the most important thing, because if someone, like I said, can prove himself that they can continue to improve as an individual and get better, that is the best thing that can happen for everybody involved in these situations. Because you, again, don't be drinking and driving, folks. That's the biggest advice I give anybody is don't be drinking and driving, because that's something that is extremely dangerous and something that can get somebody hurt or seriously killed. So to me, I think that for Kurt, I just hope for him that he does continue to improve as an individual, which it seems like he's going on the right track. He's basically cooperating with the authorities. And that's the most important thing for me, is that Kurt can get the help he needs and continue to get better. There were rumors, like I said, about a year ago that he could come back and drive Carl Lawrence as well. But I think for Kurt, at this particular point, the most important thing is to continue to get better and show improvement as an individual. Because if he can do that, I think a lot of people will be very, very happy, including myself, because that should be the most important thing, is Kurt continues to improve himself as an individual and continues to get better and get healthy so he can be back on the racetrack maybe in the future, and hopefully we could see him at the racetrack a lot more and be focused on that going forward into the future, because he's still working with 2311 right now. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chandler Smith. Now, we kind of talked a little bit about this on the channel earlier this week. We kind of glossed a little bit over this. According to a report from NASCAR Rumor Nostalgia, one of the drivers that has been linked to driving for Richard Childress Racing on a part-time basis is Chandler Smith. And it sounds like he could be headed over to RCR in 2025. It's heavily rumored at the moment right now that Chandler Smith, of course, will not be back with Joe Gibbs Racing in the 2025 season. As we do know at this point, the 3 drivers that are signed for the program are Brandon Jones, who we all thought would be driving the number 19. Of course, that number he did confirm will not be his number. Sounds like probably the 20 will be the number they do end up using next year. Also, of course, there are other drivers going over there. Taylor Gray will be driving the number, I believe the number 18 or 19 or something like that, or basically 54, and William Swalch will be driving number 18. Now, we do expect that Joe Gibbs Racing will have a 4th part-time entry or a 4th full-time car, but that is going to be the rotation seat for 2025. It sounds like there's a chance Eric Almirola could come back to that program next year. It does sound like Ryan Truex and Mark Truex Jr. will be two of the drivers behind the wheel of that program for 2025, and maybe even other guys could get behind the wheel in the Cup Series like a Bubba Wallace, maybe even Ty Gibbs as well, and maybe Denny Hamlin and Christopher Bell could be behind the wheel of that seat for next year. If Chandler Smith goes to RCR, that would be super, super interesting. Now, I do believe that Austin Hill and Chandler Smith have not seen eye to eye in the past, and they haven't gotten along either. But if it's just for the Cup Series next year, that is certainly interesting, right? Again, it all depends on if he doesn't go back to Joe Gibbs Racing next year, which, again, it sounds very likely he won't be back at JGR because from what he had said, they've lost a lot of funding in not sponsorship, but a lot of the funding that Chandler Smith did have. He unfortunately lost it not too long ago. So to me, I think that if this is true and that this is the case for him going to RCR, at least on a part-time basis, I do think he does have potential where he can be very successful with this team. The one issue with this car is the fact that this car has had issues on the reliability side of things. That's been one of the big problems that this car really, really has had. So that's the thing I worry about for Chandler Smith. If they can bring a reliable car to their Cup program, then I think they've got a chance and opportunity to be super, super competitive. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens going forward into the future with Chandler Smith. But it does sound like right now that his future is a little bit uncertain at this point. But there's also a chance and possibility that we could see Chandler Smith joining up with RCR in 2025, which I think would be a very interesting move for RCR if they could find a way to bring Chandler Smith into their program in the 2025 season. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. As it was confirmed last night that Kyle Busch will finally announce that he will be officially competing in the 2025 Chili Bowl Nationals. This has been one of my dream scenarios, is to see a guy like Kyle Busch, one of the greatest drivers in NASCAR Cup Series history, get the chance and opportunity to run in the Chili Bowl. And he is also going to run a couple of winged midget races, I believe, this December, as he will be looking to get prepared to run in this event. We have seen a lot of legends from the NASCAR scene be super successful at the Chili Bowl. Kyle Larson's won a couple of them. Christopher Bell's won a few races. Tony Stewart has won quite a few. And Kyle Busch has also competed in the Tulsa Shootout in many years in the past. I don't know what number Kyle Busch will be using for the Chili Bowl, but Kyle Busch obviously will have to qualify his way in through the events and will also likely have to go through the alphabet soup, which for the Chili Bowl every year, they go through the alphabet soup. They go from like the O main and the P mains and the Q mains all the way up to the A main, but that's one issue they've always had with the Chili Bowl is sometimes it takes forever to get through the day. But I do think for Kyle Busch, this has been one race that a lot of people have been wanting to see Kyle Busch compete in, and now he's going to get the chance and opportunity. I really hope we do get to see people like Shane Van Gisbergen perhaps run this event. I would absolutely love to see Kyle Larson come back and Chase Elliott and more NASCAR Cup Series drivers get the chance and opportunity to run this event, because the more entries you get and the more big names you get, the better tickets will be and the more attendance and the more people will show up. I don't remember where they're broadcasting the race. Maybe on Flow Racing is where they're going to broadcast it this year, which would make a lot of sense. But to me, I really think Kyle Busch coming back and running the Chili Bowl this upcoming year is absolutely a massive and huge storyline. Do I think he's going to win? I don't know. It'd be freaking incredible if he could go out there and win the Chili Bowl, but I think he's going to have a tall order because there's a lot of great names in that event. People like Justin Grant competing. People like Tanner Thorson most likely showing up once again. Rico Abreu, who's raced in that event many times. Brad Sweet could be back in the event. You've, of course, got other big names like Buddy Kofoid, other people that are part of it or could be running this. And I think that you've got a lot of big names, especially with the Keith Coons group who works over there. And Jade Avedisian also is probably going to be back running in this event as well. To me, though, this is massively amazing to see that Kyle Busch is finally running the Chili Bowl. This has been one of my dream drivers who would like to see run the Chili Bowl, and I'm very happy and glad to see, nonetheless, that Kyle Busch officially has announced he's going to run the Chili Bowl. I'm excited to see what he can do and see if he can be super successful in the Chili Bowl Nationals in 2025. We'll see if he can be very successful next January in this year's upcoming Chili Bowl Nationals. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about 2311 and Front Row Motorsports. As it was reported yesterday by Bob Pockers that 2311 and Front Row's appeal to the preliminary injunction has been docketed into the U.S. Court of Appeals, which is the Fourth Circuit Court. It was also reported by Bob Pockrass earlier today that basically they say they're going to have irreparable harm by basically not being able to tell their sponsors and their drivers and everybody involved they don't have everything fully set for 2025, that being 23XI and Front Row as well. Let's go through the backstory of this whole entire lawsuit because there's a lot to go through. 23XI and Front Row Motorsports did not sign the charter agreement with NASCAR, and they're currently suing NASCAR on antitrust claims. Jeffrey Kessler is the lawyer for the teams, while Chris Yates is a lawyer for NASCAR. They basically been going back and forth with basically their responses to each other. And then, of course, we saw earlier this week, last week, they had their basically preliminary injunction case. The judge on Friday confirmed that the preliminary injunction has been denied as he felt that the burden had not been enough and there was enough evidence for them to be able to have charters and compete as charter teams, despite the fact that they said they could compete as open teams as well in 2025. Now, Denny Hamlin then this past week, of course, spoke to the media right before the championship race had taken place and said that 23XI Racing could end up missing the Busch Light Clash and could also end up missing the Daytona 500 in 2025 without the charters and the charter money as well. And that's why we're at this point with these appeals. Now, obviously, it's expected that these appeals will be heard if they do end up getting heard December 3rd, 10th, or 13th. And apparently, had they not had these appeals exerted or moved up earlier in the year to this year, they would have had to wait till March 18th. And that's after the season had completely started. Because remember, the season technically starts on February 2nd, which is only about 2.5 months from now, at the Busch Light Clash at Bowman Gray Stadium. So that could definitely mean that they could end up missing the Busch Light Clash. This means the futures of both those teams are definitely a little bit uncertain. Now, it is still expected that Tyler Reddick will be back with 23XI, even though there is a rumor that I think Rubbins Racing, or basically one of the pages I think that Barstool has, they were saying maybe we could see potentially Tyler Reddick go to Joe Gibbs Racing, race in Denny Hamlin's car at the Clash, which could certainly be a possibility with the contract Reddick has. I think he has to run with a car that is chartered, so that certainly could be an option, a possibility. While Bubba Wallace, I think, would be set to go. Bubba Wallace is not going anywhere. Same with people like Todd Gilliland and Noah Gragson, and even Zane Smith and Riley Herbst, who are also expected to join, maybe even if Carl Lewis, Herbert, those people come into play. But my point is, and the thing I want to say is that for 23XI and Front Row, I really hope this gets resolved for their party, right? I would like to see 23XI and Front Row make changes to the sport. I think that is certainly important. But at this point, what do, right? If you don't get this appeal approved, do you just not show up to the track at all next year? Do you end up missing the Daytona 500, which is the biggest money pool of the year? Do you not show up and do you not get paid at all? Because open teams are still expected, even 23XI and Front Row, they're still expected to get a ton of money. And the other thing we got to ask ourselves too is, what happens to those Super Haas Racing charters, right? Those SHR charters that were supposed to be purchased by both 23XI and Front Row, because Super Haas Racing signed the charter agreement. They signed the new one, even though they're only going to be a one-car team next year. They signed the agreement. And 23XI and Front Row are expected to expand next year, but if they didn't sign the charter agreement and they don't have any charters and they can't compete as 3 full-time entries next year, that's going to hurt them going forward. So I think that there is still a lot to play when it comes to this lawsuit, right? And I think there's going to be a lot of interesting information that does end up coming out as time progresses and goes on. For me, I think it's so unknown what is going to happen for 23XI and Front Row. We'll have to wait and see as more information and more comes out. But hopefully they get the appeal approved so they can still compete and they can find a way to race in 2025. So I do think their future is a little bit uncertain at this particular moment. And now we're going to jump onto the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about the NASCAR playoffs once again. If you've been on social media over the course of the last few days, we've all talked about the NASCAR playoff system. Joey Logano, of course, won the championship, right? Well, Joey Logano had a 17.1 average finish, 7 top 5s, and 13 top 10s. That is the worst statistical category, at least on average finish, for a Cup champion ever, and the worst in the top 5s and top 10s since 1950, which is 75 years ago next year when Bill Rexford won a title. And let's be real, Petty probably should have won that championship that year. But it sounds like NASCAR, for the first time, probably in about a decade, is actually open to making some changes to the playoff format. According to Adam Stern, NASCAR is planning to review its playoff format this offseason and over the next couple weeks as well. Any major changes, though, however, would not be coming in 2025. There might be some small tweaks coming into play for 2025, but also sounds like if there's going to be any major changes to the playoffs or the postseason in a nutshell, it won't be coming till 2026. I'm not surprised about this in all honesty, considering all the schedules have been set, the race times has been set, like we just talked about a little bit ago. I'm not really shocked or surprised to see this, right? I'm not surprised about it. They're not looking to make any massive changes. Now, there's been a topic about this because a lot of people feel like that there's been talk about maybe letting the regular season champion also find a way to have a bye so they can advance to the next round or advance through like the first round of the playoffs, which I don't think would make any sense personally because that regular season champion would then have no reason to show up to the track and perform. Kyle Larson, if he was to win the regular season championship next year, which there's a good chance he will win it next year if he has the pace speed that he showed this year, there's a chance he may just take off for 3 weeks and have no reason to perform. Now, with Kyle Larson, he would probably be one of the exceptions, but there's a chance Kyle Larson could take off, like Joey Logano did at Homestead after winning Vegas and Tyler Reddick did at Martinsville, where he basically ran 30th all day long and struggled. That's not a good decision. There is talk that maybe if they do have a system going instead of having a one-race championship and making it a three-race championship. That is definitely a lot better. There is no denying that, and I would like that a lot more than a one-race championship. But I feel like you need to have more than 3 races. For me, I would go back to having the OG chase system, but bringing in the stage points and the stage wins, and you're not allowed to make the playoffs with a win. I'm sorry, unless you maybe get like 4 or 5 wins, and you win like a lot of races, which you're ultimately at that point, you're going to make the playoffs regardless. That really shouldn't change. I think that needs to change. The 2 biggest things that most people have a massive problem with the system, there's another thing we'll get to here in just a minute, but I think the 2 biggest problems most people have with the current system, winning your in. No driver should be able to guarantee their spot into the playoffs basically by winning a race. I'm sorry, Harrison Burr should not have been able to make the playoffs because he won Daytona. That's stupid. There's no reason that a guy should be able to lock their way in the playoffs based off the fact they won a race. And the one-race championship. The one-race championship has been the biggest holdup for me with this system. I don't think we should have one race to crown a champion, especially when certain drivers are good at a certain track. That's why while I love Homestead to be the season finale, I'm worried that you're going to have only a few guys win, but you're also going to potentially have more opportunities for drivers to show up and be competitive and run very, very well. So Homestead would be better. But I do think that having one race to crown a champion has been a major problem with the NASCAR playoffs really since the beginning, and NASCAR's never really had that Game 7 moment. And if you want to talk about TV ratings, they've gone down every year. They didn't really go down much this year, but they still went down from 2.9 to 2.89. Still a decrease from last year. Since 2014, it's dropped nearly 50% in the last 10 years. So I think there got to be changes there. The other thing is eliminations. What comes up with eliminations? Race manipulation. We've seen a lot of race manipulation with this system the last couple of years. We saw it on full display at Martinsville. And we're going to talk about race manipulation here in just a short little bit. Don't you worry. But I do believe that we had race manipulation at Phoenix, there have been some stuff, and it seemed like there might have been according to Joey Logano, but I think that you got to get rid of the certain thing, the eliminations. I think the eliminations are a big factor to some of the major problems, and I do think if you get rid of the eliminations with the system, that fixes some of the problems. For me, 10 races to decide a champion. If you're going to have a postseason, we go back to calling it the chase, and we go back to some of the other changes, because I don't like how we crown a champion in the sport personally. It's not something that I'm a massive fan of, and I think there absolutely desperately need to be changes going forward with this system, and I'm really hoping NASCAR, which it sounds like I said, they're looking to make some changes, which is a really, really good thing. I'm hoping they continue to make the decisions and make the right decisions on what they're going to do. It seems like, though, no big changes are coming maybe for 2025, but we could see changes for 2026. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR. Now, Joey Logano was on the most recent Happy Harvick podcast with Kevin Harvick yesterday and revealed some very interesting information. They basically talked about the politics of NASCAR when it comes to the rules. Joey Logano reveals some very interesting information and says that NASCAR threatened to suspend drivers at the 2025 Daytona 500 had there been any manipulation. Now let's go back to a couple weeks ago. There was a lot of frustration after the NASCAR Cup Series race at Martinsville, the Xfinity 500. The race itself, I gotta say, was really, really good. But no one was talking about the good racing. Everybody was talking about the race manipulation. You had technically two sets of race manipulation going on. You had Chevrolet with basically William Byron, who wasn't really involved with the race manipulation, but you had Ross Chastain and Austin Dillon, who, of course, Ross drives for Chevrolet, same, of course, with Austin Dillon, and they both were part of the manipulation. Now, Austin Dillon basically said they never really manipulated. They said the deal is something that I've always been used to, which I'm just like, really, bro? We know how much BS you're basically bringing out. They basically were told on the radio, does the one know the deal? That basically gave NASCAR the right to go ahead and penalize it. But they also penalized Bubba Wallace and the 23 team for also the race manipulation that took place there. Now, obviously, Toyota responded to the race manipulation by doing certain things, which obviously that is still race manipulation. Now, Cristobal was really at the time before they got the penalties out, which they handed out one of the biggest penalties ever, basically almost as big as the Michael Waltrip racing penalty that kind of came out where it shut their programs down. But Trackhouse, Richard Childress Racing, and of course 2311 were all basically in trouble. Now Trackhouse tried to appeal it. They lost. The other two teams basically dropped their appeals because there was no way they were going to win. And NASCAR did say this week, speaking to the media during the State of Sport address, that they were planning to make changes where the manufacturers could end up getting suspended for race manipulation like this. And they're, like I said, threatening drivers to basically suspensions had they done anything at the championship race. That would be absolutely huge, and that might be able to put a stop to some of this kind of stuff. Basically threatening to suspend drivers. Even though drivers basically are paid by these manufacturers to be at the organizations that they're driving for, there has to be at least a line drawn in the sand, right? You have to find a way to draw a line in the sand and stop the race manipulation. But I think one thing that would end a lot of this race manipulation stuff going forward is changing up the playoff format like we talked about a couple minutes ago. I think if you get rid of eliminations, the race manipulation most likely will go away. 10 races to crown a champion should be the way to go if you're going to have postseason, or if we go back to a full season format, that would absolutely be something that I would love as well, though I don't think we're ever going to go back to a full season format going forward. But I truly do believe that if you get rid of some of the things that they've been doing and get rid of a lot of like the manipulation, because Chevrolet is a really big part of some of the stuff that's been going on, and apparently Joe Logano said that maybe the Trackhouse and of course Carson Osbar and Ross Chastain might have been messing with the Penske cars. That's something that he was trying to bring up, maybe trying to get him in trouble. I'm not sure. But I do believe that absolutely, without question, there has to be at least something stepped up. And if we're talking about suspending drivers for the Daytona 500, that is one thing that would get the manufacturers and their drivers' attention, saying, okay, we're not going to manipulate the outcomes of races anymore, and we're going to stop with this nonsense. That's one thing that needs to change. There has to be integrity in the sport. You have to have some sort of integrity, especially when you have a system that is so much of a crapshoot as it is. You cannot have race manipulation and all that kind of stuff happening. You have to, at some point, bridge a gap in this. And I do believe that NASCAR finally, I think, is stepping in and saying, we're not happy about it. And it seems like they might be finally, even though actions do speak louder than words. And I do believe that had you told drivers they could be suspended from the biggest race, because let's say they got suspended from that, they're not going to be able to get a waiver. That's what they said. What I'm thinking is they probably weren't going to be able to get a waiver if they tried to appeal it. So definitely don't manipulate the outcome of a race, and you'll basically FAFO. Fuck around, find out, in a sense. And I do believe that you have to quintessentially got to do something about it, right? You basically have to stop all this stuff going on, because the manipulation's been really, really bad in recent years, and I think that there have to be changes to it. So it looks like I said, that NASCAR finally might be putting their foot down and saying, hey, stop manipulating the outcomes of our races, otherwise you're going to get in a lot of trouble, and we're going to put you in jeopardy in your career, potentially, perhaps. So to me, I'm glad to see the NASCAR is kind of finally stepping in and realizing we've got to do something about this. I'm glad to see they're doing something about it, and it looks like we might be seeing some suspensions going forward for drivers if they do continue this going forward. So I'm glad to see that they're looking to make changes toward the race manipulation. So, that is going to be your today's Law NASCAR News and Motorsports News episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What are your thoughts about NASCAR potentially penalizing drivers? Have they basically done any race manipulation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what changes would you like to see toward the NASCAR playoffs? Let me know in the comments below. Tomorrow on the channel, we're going to most likely have some content dropping for you guys. We're probably going to do the top 20 drivers to watch out for in 2025. And we're also likely going to have a small silly season update going through the things that have not been announced at this point. Sunday, I might be doing the NASCAR winter predictions for 2025. And we're also likely going to have team previews dropping within the next week or so. You should be seeing 2025 NASCAR Cup predictions dropping as well. Got a lot of great content dropping that I cannot wait for you guys to check out. So, and talk about people like Haley Deegan, Carlers, Bubba Walsh, Nathan Gisberg, and name it as well in the next couple of weeks. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.